My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 54 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I was the man behind the curtain at Orion Technologies. The guy who kept the servers breathing, the data flowing, and the digital fires out. I wasn't flashy, and I never chased titles. I just made sure everything worked, day in and day out. And for 17 years, that was enough. Until one Monday morning, they called me into an office I'd practically built from the ground up and told me I was done. No warning. No thanks. Just clean out your desk. They thought I'd disappear quietly, fade away like old hardware. What they didn't know was that I'd seen it coming. And while they were celebrating my exit, I was already planning my return. You see, I don't burn bridges. I just wait for them to collapse under the weight of their own corruption. And this time, I was bringing the whole tower down. I'd watched 3 CEOs come and go, watched departments rise, merge, disappear. While others played office politics and chased promotions, I stayed late, skipped vacations, and made sure no one noticed when things almost broke. That was my job, to keep the company running without a ripple. Then came Monday morning. I was halfway through my first cup of bitter breakroom coffee when the message popped up on my screen. Martin needs to see you in his office. Now, that tone, I knew it too well. I'd heard it before, during the last restructuring, when we laid off a third of support. This wasn't a meeting. It was a burial. When I walked in, Martin Gray, our CEO, didn't even look me in the eye. Rachel from HR was already seated, eyes down, clutching a folder. The air was heavy, sterile, like the minutes before a patient flatlines. Martin cleared his throat. Daniel, after 17 years, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate your position. Just like that. No thanks. No warning. No chance to speak. A sentence to erase 17 years of service. I didn't flinch. I understand, I said quietly. Then I stood up, adjusted my sleeves, and walked out. No protest. No shouting. No tears. Just the sound of my shoes on tile and the weight of betrayal pressing between my shoulders. As I moved through the halls, heads turned and quickly ducked. Most of them were kids I'd trained myself. Good people, smart, eager, but too new to know what lived under the surface of Orion's systems. They didn't know about the custom admin pathways I'd built or the legacy code that still supported our billing structure. They didn't know that everything, carried my fingerprints. And now, they were watching it walk out the front door. Back at my desk, I took my time packing. A framed photo of my daughter in her cap and gown. A mug she made in ceramics class, chipped at the handle. A cactus that had somehow survived 17 years of fluorescent lights and dry air. Little things that meant something to me, even if I no longer meant anything to them. Bethany from marketing stopped by. Her voice cracked slightly. Daniel, I just heard. This is insane. You practically built this place. I offered her a tired smile. Companies change. But with no warning, she whispered. After everything you've done. It's fine, I said, cutting her off gently. It wasn't fine. But I wasn't about to unravel in front of her, or anyone else. As I headed for the elevator, I caught Martin standing just outside his office. No handshake, no goodbye, just watching, like he was making sure I stayed gone. He thought it was over, but he didn't know that every audit protocol, every access log, every security backdoor, I designed them, maintained them, protected them, and now, I was going to use them. I stepped into the sunlight of the parking lot, dropped my ID badge in the tray, and whispered to myself, Wednesday will be fun. I pulled into my driveway and sat there in silence, hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off. For 17 years, I'd had a purpose the moment the sun rose. Always first through the office doors, always last to leave. Now, I was just a man in a car, staring at his own house like it belonged to someone else. Inside, the silence was deafening. My wife, Andrea, looked up when I entered, her eyes scanning my face. She didn't ask a thing, just placed a fresh mug of coffee on the counter and rested a hand on my shoulder. After 19 years together, she knew when to speak and when not to. I'm going to the store, she said quietly. Need anything? I shook my head. I needed time, space, and the thing I'd hidden away for years. Once the front door closed behind her, I walked into my office and knelt beside the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a small, brushed metal flash drive. Looked ordinary enough. But that drive held everything. System logs, access records, archived reports. The digital blueprint of Orion's infrastructure. Years ago, when the company faced a potential insider threat, I designed an audit system. Legal approved the creation of secure, off-site backups. Then they forgot. I didn't. I plugged it into my personal laptop. The screen lit up with files, layers of raw data, stretching back years. It was all there. Who logged into what, when permissions changed, how finances moved. Most of it was just routine protocol, but not all of it. I opened a folder labeled Vendor Activity, Flagged. My stomach turned. I remembered it from months ago, a few unusual payments I'd flagged during a routine check. At the time, they seemed small. A couple thousand here, a few more there. The vendor was called Delta Core Solutions. I remembered the name because I didn't recognize it. Still, I hadn't pushed. It wasn't my job to monitor vendor contracts. At least, not anymore. Now I looked again, and I saw what I'd missed before. The payments had grown. $15,000, $30,000, $50,000. Consistently, monthly, always tucked into legitimate software expenses. The address? A UPS mailbox in a strip mall outside Columbus. The listed owner? Neil Gray, Martin's brother-in-law. I felt a chill run through my spine. Not fear, but clarity. This wasn't a coincidence. They hadn't just eliminated my position. They'd eliminated the one person who had full visibility into every corner of the company's digital structure. And Trevor Shields, the so-called IT consultant they brought in months ago, I checked his contract in the system. It had bypassed standard procurement entirely. They were cleaning house, silencing threats. Restructuring wasn't just about efficiency. It was about secrecy. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Steven, the junior analyst I'd mentored the past 2 years. Sorry about what happened. Shields is already in your office. Total BS, man. I stared at the screen for a long time, then replied with just one line. Don't get involved. Just watch. Because I wasn't finished. Not even close. They might have taken my badge, but they hadn't cut my access. They thought I'd vanish like old hardware, quiet, forgotten. But Wednesday was still coming, and I had work to do. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, not from an alarm, but from the heaviness pressing on my chest. I made coffee in silence, the drip of the machine the only sound in the house. The first sip tasted bitter, fitting really. There was no commute waiting for me, no tickets in the queue, no users locked out of their email. But the war I was about to wage wasn't in a cubicle. It was in the code. I booted up my laptop, plugged in the drive, and went deeper. What I'd found the night before wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern, a system. Delta Core Solutions wasn't just a one-off scam, it was a pipeline. And Martin Gray, the man who'd fired me without blinking, was right in the middle of it. I opened the financial logs from the previous 18 months. I tracked the Delta Core payments, small at first, then bold. Invoices labeled as infrastructure licensing fees, software support retainers, and cloud migration consulting. It all sounded legitimate. But the amounts? Always padded by 15 to 20%. Never enough to set off automatic red flags, but enough to siphon hundreds of thousands over time. Then came the second name, Horizon Blue Consulting. I'd never seen it before. I dug into the procurement records and found it buried in a vague strategic planning initiative. No work orders, no deliverables, just recurring monthly payments. I ran a business search. The CEO was Tracy Gray, Martin's wife. I sat back, the pieces falling into place with grim precision. 2 shell companies, both tied to Martin's family, both drawing inflated payments disguised as tech expenses. 2 drains, slowly bleeding Orion dry. And the timing? It all started right after I'd been quietly pulled from project planning meetings, stripped of budget authority, and left out of upgrade discussions. They were setting the stage, and I had been the last firewall standing. I checked system access logs, something no one else even remembered how to do. Greg Dalton, the CFO, had requested elevated financial privileges right when the first Delta Core payments began. He wasn't just signing off. He was helping them orchestrate it. And then there was Trevor Shields, the so-called consultant. Within 48 hours of his contract being approved, he'd been granted full admin access to the infrastructure I'd spent years protecting. He didn't just inherit my desk. He was given the keys to the entire kingdom. They hadn't brought him in to improve the systems. They'd brought him in to replace the only man who could expose them. And now, they thought they were in control. I saved copies of everything: logs, emails, internal permissions, even screenshots of contractor access. The digital evidence was undeniable. I wasn't just compiling data. I was building the opening statement of a reckoning. My phone buzzed again, another message from Steven. They pulled your old access today. Historical too. Trying to wipe everything. Too late. I already had what I needed. And they were too busy watching each other to realize I wasn't gone. I was just getting started. Wednesday wouldn't just be fun. It would be surgical. Wednesday morning came cloaked in a gray, overcast sky, the kind that felt like a warning. I parked across the street from Orion Technologies' sleek glass building, watching the early risers shuffle inside, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. They thought today was just another day of conference calls and code pushes. For most of them, it was. But for the men upstairs, the ones pulling strings and funneling funds, it was going to be a day they'd never forget. In the passenger seat, my old laptop hummed quietly. Logged in was a ghost email account, one I'd created years ago during a cybersecurity drill. It looked internal, untraceable from their end, and it still worked perfectly. I'd used it to test our system's vulnerability once. Now, I'd use it to prove its strength. At 9:15 a.m., I hit send. Subject line: urgent, financial irregularities, internal review required. Recipient: Martin Gray. The body of the message was short. I laid out a brief but damning overview. Excessive payments to Delta Core and Horizon Blue, inconsistencies in procurement authorizations, and timing that aligned perfectly with internal budget adjustments. I didn't mention his brother-in-law or his wife. Not yet. I wanted to see if he'd squirm, if he'd scramble. By 9:47 a.m., my phone lit up. Martin Gray. I didn't answer. At 10:30, a new email arrived. This one from Rachel in HR. Mr. Cross, we have received reports that you may have violated your confidentiality agreement by contacting Orion employees. Please cease communication immediately, or we may pursue legal action. Nice try. I never signed a separation agreement. They had marched me out without giving me anything but a cardboard box and a cold shoulder. Now they were trying to scare me into silence. Typical. Around noon, I drove to my bank. In the safe deposit box I hadn't touched in years was another encrypted drive, one even older than the flash I'd been using. On it was a trove of backups, including original architecture plans, internal emails from years past, and access records showing who approved what and when. There it was, clear as daylight: Greg Dalton, CFO, authorizing vendor payments without the usual checks. Administrative changes with his digital signature. Timestamps that aligned perfectly with Delta Core's largest invoices. Back home, I found 3 missed calls: Martin, Rachel, and now, Trevor Shields. That surprised me. Trevor wasn't a decision maker, unless he'd been more involved than I thought. A 4th message buzzed in. Steven again. Something big's going down. Shields called an emergency meeting. Everyone's tense. What's happening? I typed one line. Just watch, Steven. Keep your head down. Because it was all happening, right on schedule. They thought they were in charge, that they'd removed the threat and tightened the walls. But they forgot who built those walls. I didn't need to kick the door down to get back in. I was already inside. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, surrounded by backup drives, old printouts, and years of silent observation finally being pieced together like a crime scene mosaic. The more I uncovered, the more disgusting it became. What I had originally thought was a single thread of embezzlement had unraveled into a full-scale internal operation. Delta Core and Horizon Blue were only the front-facing scams, shell companies masked behind bloated invoices. But there was another name I hadn't seen until now: EdgePoint Consulting. Buried deep in a side ledger under External Infrastructure Review, it was barely visible, small, sporadic payments. I ran the ownership registration. Trevor Shields. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The so-called consultant they brought in to modernize IT was running his own personal heist. His shell company had been quietly funneling consulting fees to himself, padding reports, and signing off on budgets that included his own fraudulent charges. I checked his onboarding records. No procurement review. No competitive bids. No department head approval. His contract had been funneled straight through Greg Dalton's office. Rubber stamped. Fast-tracked. Hidden. It was a triangle of corruption. Martin Gray signed off on executive approvals. Greg Dalton manipulated financial records. Trevor Shields implemented the tech side to erase the evidence. And me? I was the firewall they needed to disable. Too bad for them. I was still running in the background. I compiled every transaction into a master spreadsheet, every invoice, timestamp, access log, and signature. I wrote out the web of connections in plain language. Fake vendors, forged documentation, bypass protocols. They were siphoning millions, hiding behind systems I designed to keep the company safe. Then I found something else. Internal memos between Greg and Martin, disguised as routine system upgrade discussions. But they were coded. They referenced cleaning up legacy redundancies, streamlining authorization, and offboarding dated dependencies. They were talking about me. I leaned back in my chair, adrenaline and cold fury pulsing beneath my skin. They hadn't just wanted me gone. They wanted my entire history wiped. Every line of code, every trace of oversight. They knew I was the only one with a clear view of the entire system architecture. And now, their silence made sense. The stiff HR emails, the emergency meetings, Trevor's sudden involvement. They weren't trying to threaten me into silence. They were bracing for impact. At 3 a.m., I zipped the final report, the cross report. I titled it and made 3 copies. One stayed with me. One went into the safe deposit box, and one I uploaded to a private encrypted drive in the cloud, with timed access if something ever happened to me. By the time the sun rose, I was ready. I didn't want their jobs. I didn't want their company. I wanted the truth laid bare. And the men who thought they were too smart to get caught, they were about to find out what happens when you spend 17 years underestimating the wrong man. By Thursday morning, the trap was set. I met Alan Brenner, a senior board member I hadn't spoken to in years, in a quiet little park 3 blocks from Orion HQ. We used to collaborate back when the company still took cybersecurity seriously. He'd been one of the few who read every audit report I wrote. He was already there when I arrived, seated on a bench, wrapped in a wool coat, coffee in hand. "Daniel," he said, standing as I approached. "It's been a long time." "Too long," I replied, handing him a sealed envelope and a flash drive. "Everything's in there. Transactions, access logs, vendor registrations, internal emails. All of it." He didn't open it, just nodded and slid it into his briefcase. "Are you looking to come back?" he asked after a beat. "No," I said. "I'm not looking for anything. I just want the board to know what's been happening under their noses." Alan studied me for a moment, then gave a half smile. "I always figured you knew where the bodies were buried." "I didn't bury them," I replied, "but I marked the graves." That night, back at home, I told Andrea everything. Not just about the fraud, but about what was coming. She listened in silence, hands folded in her lap. After a moment, she said, "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into the Ghost account one final time, and scheduled a mass email. Subject line: "Before you approve Q2 bonuses, read this." Recipients: every board member. Attachments: the full report. Every piece of evidence, annotated, organized, time-stamped, bulletproof. Delivery time: 8 a.m. sharp, Friday morning, 30 minutes before their quarterly finance meeting. Then I shut the laptop and poured myself a drink. Not to celebrate, to wait. Friday morning, 8:17 a.m., my phone started buzzing. Unrecognized numbers. Board assistants. Corporate lines. I ignored them all. At 9 a.m., the Emergency Finance Committee meeting began. Alan would be there, watching them scramble, watching them lie, watching the dominoes fall. At 9:32, a message from Stephen lit up my phone. "Police just showed up. Greg and Martin are in separate conference rooms. Shields looks like he's going to vomit." "What the hell did you do?" I didn't reply. I just sipped my coffee and waited. At 10:03, I received a call from Patricia Graves, Orion's lead counsel. "Mr. Cross," she began, voice carefully measured. "We need you to come in immediately to discuss the information you've shared with the board." "I'm available by phone," I said calmly. "This really requires—" "No," I interrupted. "Everything I know is in that report. Everything I have is backed up in multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me or my family, the entire case gets forwarded to the SEC, the IRS, and 3 major news outlets." There was a long pause. Then she said, "The board is taking this very seriously. Several executives have already been placed on leave." "I've done my part," I replied. "Now it's your turn." I ended the call and stood up from my desk. Not to run, not to hide, but to finally watch the empire they built on greed start to collapse, one exposed lie at a time. By early afternoon, the headlines were already spreading like wildfire. Executives under investigation at Orion Technologies for financial misconduct. No names, yet, but I knew that wouldn't last long. At 2:06 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Alan Brenner. No greetings. No small talk. It's a bloodbath, he said flatly. Greg caved the second he saw the full report. He confessed to authorizing the Delta Core and Horizon Blue payments. Blamed Martin for pressuring him. Says it all started as a budget fix. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. And Martin? Denying everything, of course. Claims he had no idea where the money was going. Says all the approvals were handled by the finance team. I could almost hear Alan's disgust through the phone. And Shields, trying to play dumb, says he was just a consultant, never involved in financial matters. But we found his signature on internal access requests and invoices from EdgePoint Consulting. He's cooked. There was a moment of silence. We've suspended all three, pending criminal investigation, Alan added. The board voted unanimously. No debates. Just signatures. I stared out the window, the weight of it all slowly landing. 17 years of loyalty, erased in an instant. But now the truth had traction. The quiet man they pushed out was the one they should have been listening to all along. Then Alan said something that surprised me. They want to talk to you. I said nothing. They're creating a new position, he continued. Chief Information Security Officer. Direct report to the board. No red tape. No executive override. You'd have complete oversight of all technology, vendor contracts, and digital integrity. I swallowed hard. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even redemption. It was power. But not the kind you flaunt. The kind you earn. I'll think about it, I said. That night, Andrea and I sat on the back porch, the sun dipping low across the quiet neighborhood we'd built a life in. I told her everything, again. Only this time, it wasn't about the crime. It was about what came next. Do you want to go back? She asked softly. I stared into my cup. The people who betrayed me. They're gone, or they're going. But going back to that place. She nodded gently. You wouldn't be going back as the man they pushed out. I looked at her. You'd be going back as the man they now need. That stayed with me. Later that night, I reopened my long-abandoned LinkedIn profile. I typed a single sentence, then hit post. Never burn bridges. Let them collapse under the weight of their own greed. Within minutes, my inbox was flooded. Colleagues, recruiters, journalists, even quiet messages from board members. They all wanted to talk. But I didn't reply, because I already knew what was coming next. Monday morning, I'd walk through those doors again, but not as a background tech. This time, I'd be the firewall, the one they couldn't ignore, the one they'd never underestimate again. Monday morning, I stepped through Orion's front doors, wearing a dark suit I hadn't touched in years. It still fit. The lobby was quieter than usual, but the silence wasn't apathy this time. It was awareness. Heads turned as I passed. No one whispered. No one smiled. But no one looked away either. The security guard blinked when he saw me. Mr. Cross, he said, almost stunned. Then, without being asked, he reached for a badge and handed it to me. Executive Access, Daniel Cross, CISO. The elevator ride to the top floor was surreal. For 17 years, I'd never once set foot beyond the 4th level. Now, I was heading straight to the boardroom. The same place that once signed off on pushing me out. Inside, the board was seated. Karen Delgado, the interim CEO, stood as I entered. Her face was measured, composed. But beneath that polished exterior, I could see the tension. Mr. Cross, she said, thank you for coming. We've reviewed your terms. I said nothing. Just waited. We've approved all of them. She placed a signed contract on the table. I flipped through it, skimming past the legal jargon to the 3 clauses that mattered most. Unrestricted audit authority across all departments. Independent cybersecurity and infrastructure budget. Veto power over all tech-related financial decisions. They'd given me everything I asked for. Not because they wanted to, but because they didn't have a choice. You'll report directly to the board, Karen added. No executive filter. No delays. I nodded once. Then we're done here. I didn't shake hands. I didn't thank anyone. I just stood, pocketed my badge, and left the room. By the time I reached my new office, corner suite, high above the skyline, I already had messages waiting. A memo from finance. A security flag from compliance. A quiet, welcome back, email from Stephen. I smiled. Later that afternoon, Andrea walked in. "Lunch?" she asked. "Absolutely," I said, grabbing my coat. We passed through the IT floor on the way out. Conversations paused. This time, not from fear, but from recognition. Every technician, every analyst, every junior dev who had watched me get discarded now saw me rise again. Not by revenge, but by resolve. Outside, the October air was crisp, clean. My phone buzzed, another message from Alan Brenner. "Board just approved your expanded security oversight. Unanimous vote." I slid the phone back into my pocket. Some bridges collapse under their own weight. Others, if rebuilt right, become stronger than they ever were before. And this one, I built it brick by brick, with quiet clarity, unshakable truth, and a level of precision they never saw coming. If this experience taught me anything, it's this. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. And loyalty should never cost you your self-worth. They thought I was just a tech guy, a relic. But now I'm the safeguard they can't afford to lose. And this time, I'm the one writing the protocols. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that age doesn't make you obsolete, it makes you sharp. Experience isn't just a badge of time served. It's armor forged in quiet moments and overlooked details. In a world that moves fast and often forgets its foundations, I've learned that preparation beats panic and documentation beats noise. For those of us in our later years, it's easy to feel replaced or undervalued, but we carry something younger people don't: perspective. So my advice is simple: stay observant, stay prepared, and never hand over your dignity, no matter who tries to push you aside. Keep records, watch for patterns, and when life tries to silence you, speak through your actions. I didn't fight back with noise, I fought back with truth. Because in the end, it's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your worth on your own terms.